And welcome back. We're being joined by our Statehouse insiders tonight, Antoine Seatwright and Dave Wilson. Guys, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about some things that have been happening over the last few days. An effort to bring down some monuments in South Carolina. There was a call to bring down the Tillman Monument on the Statehouse grounds. And just yesterday, a Lowcountry lawmaker saying he wants the John C. Calhoun Monument removed in Charleston. Dave, how doable is this going to be in South Carolina? We've been down this road before, and there hasn't been much movement on this in the past.
That has been a lengthy process. The conversations have gone on in the past. We talked about this with the J. Miriam Sims monument that's on the corner of the State House grounds on the corner of Gervais and Assembly Streets. We had that conversation a year or two ago. There will be conversations that go on. I mean, when you have statues coming down in Richmond, Virginia, when you have statues coming down in other places, the question is this: how do you place history into context, and are you trying to erase part of history? And yet at the same time, we recognize the fact that there are parts of history that are being acknowledged here with these statues that really have a double connotation when you really take a look at it, because you hear the rest of the story, as Antoine, you and I have had in conversations both on and off.
Well, I think there are two ways to look at it. You can look at it, this presents a tremendous opportunity to expand history and honor people like Robert Smalls and others who paid a tremendous sacrifice to be a part of South Carolina history. Or you can look at it as if erasing bad marks that may be on the pieces of paper of history. When I look at my alma mater, Winthrop University, who has Tillman Hall, that name is at Clemson University as well. There's an effort by two former Clemson athletes to rename some things at Clemson University. I think across the country what people realize is that we have to not necessarily forget history, but we have to make sure we do everything to send a message that that history is no longer a part of us. And who knows how that's going to shape out the South Carolina legislative process? Well, it's very complex when it comes to removing and naming and expanding history. And I think that because Republicans dominate the State House, I think that makes it more complicated for these things to happen. But I do not think we lose anything by opening up the conversation. And truth be told, Dave, there are some monuments. There are some things that have been honored in South Carolina for a very long time, in which it's time for us to turn the page and not look at them as how we look at who we are as South Carolinians.
Well, you have to take a look, JR, when you take a look at the State House right now, if you faced on the western and southern sides, there are bronze stars that are on the sides of the building. We are doing that as part of the commemoration of the State House being there and surviving the Civil War and the attack of Sherman into Columbia. There are things that are like that, but Antoine is right. There needs to be a place where we're expanding and telling the full story of history, not erasing the part that was there, because that is part of the American story. But we have to also look at who else are we going to take the time to honor? How else are we going to use those public grounds to talk about and to honor a lot of different people who have contributed to the success of South Carolina and the success of the United States?
Antoine, let me ask you this. Senator Graham was asked about removing of some statues and monuments earlier this week. He said it was a local issue. And where does it stop? Do you take down the statues of George Washington? He's a former slave owner as well. There's a statue of him on the steps of our State House here in Columbia.
But that's different than Ben Pitchfork Tillman. That's different than, some of the other things we've seen around the country, the Robert E. Lees of the world. Those things are different than some of the national monuments we have in the D.C. area. Of course, this thing will be a marathon, not a sprint. Of course, the politics play into this. Of course, the temperature of the moment also has a strong indication in what happens. But at the end of the day, what message do we want to send to future generations? It's okay to honor Ben Pitchfork Tillman in the state of South Carolina, in the same place where 9 people were murdered in a church in Charleston by white supremacists, and they took that in order to remove the Confederate battle flag from the state capitol. What message do we want to send to the public about who we are as South Carolinians and the progress we made in the state? And I think most people, most reasonable people, Dave, Democrats, Republicans, black and white, despite our differences in our sets of experiences, agree that it may be time to turn the page and honor some of and highlight some of the things that we may be proud of about our history.
And that's a place where we really have to take a look at this, JR and Antoine, from the standpoint of how do we respect history as part of what is being told of what has taken place in our country, what has taken place in South Carolina, and not erase the people who have been cornerstones of our state and cornerstones of our country.
All right, so realistically, both of you guys, how realistic is it that some of these statues and monuments will be coming down in South Carolina in the next 6 months to a year?
Not within the next 6 months. I can tell you that.
I don't.
Yeah, could it happen in the next legislature? I'm sorry, go ahead, Antoine.
I'm sorry, Dave. I think
realistically, we're learning how to talk over each other on Zoom, you know.
We're zooming over each other. I think realistically, there will be some conversation and debate in the next legislative gathering and gatherings, and that may trickle into next year. At the end of the day, it's going to be up to the will and the body of the General Assembly, Democrats and Republicans, upstate, low country, PD, House and Senate, including sign off by the governor in order to get some of these things done. Unfortunately, it took 9 people being killed in a church in order for the Confederate battle flag to be removed from the Capitol. So if you ask me, I think we'll be pushing water up a hill about expectations of that taking place.
Well, and the other thing about this, JR, is that we've got a legislative session that has been extended right now. It's going into the fall. And the reason for that is because of coronavirus and the legislature not being able to meet. That legislative session ends at the end of this calendar year. If it is not addressed, guess what? On January 1, boom, everything starts back over. Every bill is new. Every bill is fresh. Everything that we have discussed up to this point, if it has not become law, is erased from the discussion, and we start all over again in the next legislative session.
Including, Dave Wilson, a new General Assembly, because elections would have taken place.
Exactly, because when elections take place in November, we're going to have a new General Assembly with some old faces, as we have heard from last night's election, as well as new faces that are going to be coming in. And so that's going to be a new part of the discussion that will take place. How well that will carry over with the members of the new General Assembly when they come in 2021, that'll be what we'll have to see.
All right, Dave Wilson, Antoine Seawright, guys, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, JR.
Thank you.
All right.